Okay, let's unpack this. Think about your conversations in English. How do you really get across what you think, how you feel, your perspective on things?
Mm.
It feels like one of the most basic, essential skills, right? But if you listen closely, or, if you've tried to move beyond the absolute fundamentals yourself, you start to notice there's a lot more going on than just saying, I think, or I agree.
Absolutely. And that's precisely the territory we're exploring today. This deep dive is centered around a single, very practical source. Some key excerpts from a document called day7.pdf.
Day7.pdf, okay.
Yeah, it seems to be part of a larger English learning program, maybe called 30 Days to Fluent English or something like that. And this particular section, Day 7, is explicitly dedicated to expressing your opinions in English.
Gotcha. So our mission today, drawing only from the insights and examples provided in this specific day7.pdf source, is to really dig into the methods and phrases it recommends. We want to understand not just what phrases are listed, but why the source suggests them, how they function in practice according to its examples, and, well, what the source seems to imply is the secret sauce to sounding not just correct, but genuinely confident and natural when you're sharing your viewpoint, agreeing with someone, or, navigating disagreement.
And for you, listening right now, tackling this specific source is incredibly relevant. Maybe you're finding your English is functional but a bit repetitive, or you hesitate to jump into discussions because you're not sure how to phrase things politely or powerfully.
Yeah, that feeling.
This source directly addresses those points. By analyzing its structured approach, you can potentially walk away with concrete strategies and phrases to practice, aiming to sound more fluent, confident, and natural, just as the source itself aims to teach.
Exactly. The source lays out a clear path. It starts with how to give your own opinion, then moves to reacting to others, agreeing politely, then disagreeing politely, and finally it touches on adding personality to make your opinions more engaging.
Makes sense.
We'll follow that exact structure from the source to guide our deep dive today.
Sounds like a plan. Let's start where the source does, giving your opinion confidently.
The source makes a really interesting point right off the bat. It observes that English learners often fall into a pattern of overusing I think.
The default.
It's quick, it's easy, and it's technically correct. But the source suggests that while I think is okay, it's quite basic, and that using alternative phrases can help you sound more natural and fluent.
Right. It's not presented as wrong, just limited, maybe? The source immediately throws out a list of alternatives. The ones it highlights are, in my opinion, personally, I believe, from my perspective, I'd say that, and as far as I'm concerned.
Looking at that list, you can see a common thread, can't you? They all explicitly preface the statement to clearly mark it as your personal view. In my opinion is the most direct. It's like a label. Hey, what follows is just my opinion. Simple, clear.
Yes, and personally, I believe, takes it a step further. Adding personally emphasizes that this is your individual conviction, perhaps distinguishing it from a commonly held view or a factual statement.
Right.
And using believe can often carry a bit more weight than think, suggesting a more considered or deeply held conviction. Although the source doesn't really break down that specific nuance, it's kind of inherent in the word choice it presents.
That's a great point. It feels like believe adds a layer of sincerity or maybe conviction. What about from my perspective? The source lists that too.
That one is fascinating. While the source doesn't explicitly analyze the nuance, the phrase itself implies you are presenting your view as seen from a specific angle or viewpoint.
Okay.
From my perspective, suggests an awareness that there might be other valid perspectives. It lets you state your view confidently while subtly acknowledging the complexity of an issue. It can make you sound more thoughtful and less absolute, which paradoxically can increase your perceived confidence because you're comfortable with nuance.
So it's not just stating your view, but framing it as a view among potentially many. That's a really interesting implied function of that phrase, just based on the source including it in the list.
Precisely. Then we have, I'd say that. This one feels quite conversational and often a bit less formal than, say, in my opinion or personally, I believe.
Yeah, it sounds lighter.
It can function like a gentle way of offering a conclusion you've come to or just putting a thought out there without too much formality.
Yeah, I'd say that can almost sound like a prediction or an estimation based on what you know, even if it's personal. Like, based on what I've seen, I'd say that project will take at least 2 weeks. It softens the assertion slightly, doesn't it?
Exactly. And finally, as far as I'm concerned, the source uses this phrase later when talking about remote work depending on job and lifestyle. This phrase is often used to scope or limit the opinion to your personal sphere of relevance, knowledge, or concern.
Ah, okay.
It's like saying, speaking for myself, or from where I stand, or considering what matters to me.
Ah, so if the topic is really broad, like the economy, you might say, as far as I'm concerned, the biggest challenge is inflation, implying you're focusing on the part that impacts you or what you follow most closely, rather than making some grand, all-encompassing economic statement. It sort of defines the boundaries of your opinion.
Yes, it effectively says, within my frame of reference, this is how I see it. The source's choice to include this suggests that confident opinions aren't always sweeping generalizations, but can be clearly defined by one's own perspective or concerns, which is quite insightful.
Okay, let's dive into the source's specific examples. The basic opinion it starts with is on remote work. I think it's great. Simple.
Very simple.
Now, the source immediately provides alternatives structured using these phrases. The first is, personally, I believe remote work is fantastic because it gives people more flexibility.
Right, let's break that down the way the source seems to be structuring it. It starts with the introductory phrase, personally, I believe. Then comes the core opinion itself, phrased perhaps a little more strongly than, great remote work is fantastic.
But crucially, the source doesn't stop there. It adds a reason because it gives people more flexibility. The structure, phrase, plus opinion, plus reason, appears to be fundamental to the source's idea of a confident, well-developed opinion. It's not just stating what you think, but offering why.
That because clause is key, isn't it? It elevates the opinion from a simple statement of preference to something supported by a rationale. The source is teaching learners that confidence isn't just in the opening phrase, but in the substance that follows.
Precisely. And the second example the source gives for expressing opinion is, as far as I'm concerned, it's a great option, but it depends on the person's job and lifestyle.
This is where the, as far as I'm concerned, scoping comes in, and it adds even more complexity. You start with the phrase, state an opinion. That's a great option. But then the source immediately adds a significant condition or nuance. But it depends on the person's job and lifestyle. Analyzing this example, the source shows that expressing an opinion confidently doesn't mean stating it as an absolute truth. It can mean acknowledging the limitations or conditions under which that opinion holds true,
Right.
adding that, but it depends. Clause demonstrates a considered view, which again projects confidence and thoughtfulness. It's a complex opinion delivered clearly.
I see. So the source's examples teach that confidence comes from using these varied introductory phrases and backing up your opinion with reasons, details, or acknowledging conditions. It's about depth, not just volume, right?
Exactly.
Let's really flesh this out with some more hypothetical examples, following the source's pattern of phrase plus opinion plus elaboration, reason, condition, detail. Let's pick a simple topic like healthy eating.
Okay. Instead of just, I think healthy eating is important, let's use the source's phrases, using in my opinion. In my opinion, healthy eating is crucial for long-term energy levels, not just weight management.
Okay, so phrase, opinion, and a specific benefit as the reason for long-term energy levels. Nice. How about from my perspective on the same topic? Maybe something like, from my perspective, healthy eating is challenging mainly because access to affordable, fresh produce isn't equal for everyone. So phrase plus opinion plus a societal reason adding that nuance.
Good one. It shows you can connect the personal perspective to a broader issue. Using personally, I believe, about, say, the best way to learn something new. Personally, I believe learning by doing is the most effective method because it creates stronger practical memory than just reading. Phrase plus opinion plus educational reason.
Or, I'd say that, on something like the impact of technology. I'd say that while technology connects us globally, it sometimes makes us feel more isolated locally. Phrase, opinion, and a balanced, nuanced observation.
That example with I'd say that beautifully shows how the phrase can introduce a slightly more balanced or observational opinion, not necessarily strong belief,
Yeah, exactly.
And as far as I'm concerned, could be used on a topic like prioritizing tasks. As far as I'm concerned, starting with the most difficult task makes the rest of the day feel easier. Phrase plus opinion plus personal consequence or reason. It scopes it to your personal workflow.
Right, this is how I handle it and why I think it works for me. These hypothetical examples, built strictly on the source's pattern of pairing the introductory phrase with supportive content, reasons, conditions, nuances, observations, really underscore that the source is teaching a more sophisticated way to structure your thoughts than just a simple subject-verb-object opinion.
Definitely. And the source explicitly states that repetition is key to making these phrases feel natural. It's not enough to just know the list. You need to practice integrating them into your active vocabulary until they come out smoothly.
Right.
This highlights the source's pedagogical foundation learning requires active practice and habit formation.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered giving your own opinion. The source then moves on to reacting to others, specifically agreeing. It makes a similar point to the "I think" observation. Simply saying "I agree" is functional, but the source suggests it's basic and less engaging.
The goal, according to the source, is to express agreement in a way that is more natural and engaging. And just like with opinions, it provides a list of alternative phrases. I completely agree with you. That's a great point. I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely right. And exactly. That's what I was thinking.
There are different levels and angles of agreement in that list, aren't there? "I completely agree with you" is a direct, strong affirmation of shared opinion.
Yes, and I couldn't agree more is an idiomatic way to express the absolute maximum level of agreement. It means it is impossible for me to agree more strongly than I currently do. It's very common and emphatic.
Right. That's a great point. It's interesting because it focuses the agreement specifically on the validity or quality of the other person's idea or argument. It's a way of saying, you've made a valid contribution, rather than just, I have the same opinion.
It validates their thinking process, which is a nice touch. While you're absolutely right, it's a very direct validation of the other person's correctness. It's strong and affirming, directly confirming their statement.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. It's probably the most dynamic and natural sounding one. It conveys agreement, but also a sense of shared cognition, like you were thinking the same thing independently, or were about to say it yourself.
It creates a feeling of connection and mutual understanding. It shows you're not just agreeing, but you're aligned in your thoughts. Very conversational.
Let's look at the source's examples for agreement. Someone says exercise is really important for mental health. The simple response, according to the source, is, I agree.
The baseline.
The source then shows alternatives that build upon this. First, you're absolutely right. Exercise helps reduce stress and keeps you energized.
Here, the source demonstrates that engaging agreement involves more than just the agreement phrase. It uses the phrase, you're absolutely right, and then adds a supporting detail or elaboration that reinforces why exercise helps mental health, helps reduce stress, and keeps you energized. This elaboration shows you've processed their point and can add to it.
Right, you're not just nodding along, you're contributing further information that supports the point. The second example from the source is, that's a great point. I always feel better after a workout.
This example uses the agreement phrase, that's a great point, and follows it with a personal anecdote or experience, I always feel better after a workout. This is another crucial technique the source highlights for natural, engaging agreement. Connect the idea to your own life.
Yeah.
It makes your agreement feel more authentic and adds a human touch to the conversation.
So, the source is showing us that natural agreement isn't just a verbal signal. It's an opportunity to add value to the conversation, either by providing supporting details or sharing a relevant personal experience.
Exactly.
Let's generate a few more examples following this source-based pattern. Agreement phrase plus elaboration anecdote. Imagine someone says, reading different types of books is really the best way to understand different cultures.
Okay. Using I couldn't agree more. You could say, I couldn't agree more. It gives you such a direct window into different ways of thinking and living that you wouldn't get anywhere else. Here, you use the strong agreement phrase and elaborate on how reading provides that window.
Or using exactly. That's what I was thinking.
Thinking.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. Just last month, I read a novel set in a country I knew nothing about, and it completely changed my perspective on daily life there. Shared thought plus a brief, specific anecdote. Very natural.
Right. If the topic is the importance of taking breaks when studying or working, someone says taking short breaks actually makes you more productive in the long run.
You could respond, that's a great point. My brain feels so much clearer after stepping away for 15 minutes. I can come back and focus much better. Using the phrase plus a personal observation about the benefit.
Or, I completely agree with you. Trying to push through for hours just leads to burnout, but a little rest makes a huge difference. Strong agreement plus elaboration on the consequence of not taking breaks, reinforcing the original point. These examples, guided by the source's structure, turn a simple, I agree, into a richer, more interactive part of the conversation.
And the source, again, stresses the importance of practicing these phrases repeatedly. It's about building fluency through habit, making these responses automatic rather than something you have to consciously construct syllable by syllable.
Absolutely. Now we move to potentially the most delicate part of conversational dynamics that the source addresses, disagreement.
Right, the tricky one.
The source is very realistic here, stating, sometimes you won't agree, and that's okay. This acceptance is the starting point. But it immediately pivots to emphasize that the crucial part is doing it in a polite and respectful way. This shows the source isn't just teaching language function, but also, interpersonal communication skills.
And the list of phrases the source provides for polite disagreement really highlights this focus on politeness. They all have a similar structure, which is key. I see your point, but I get what you're saying, but I feel differently. That's an interesting perspective, but I think I respect your opinion, but I have a different view. I get where you're coming from, but I see it differently.
The common thread, as you pointed out, is starting with an acknowledgement of the other person's viewpoint before introducing your disagreement. This initial phrase acts as a softener.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It signals that you've listened, you've understood, or are making an effort to understand their position, even though you're about to present a contrasting one. This is fundamental to polite disagreement, according to the source's selection of phrases. And all of them use but to signal that the differing view is coming.
I see your point, but, and I get what you're saying, but, and I get where you're coming from, but, are all slightly different ways to say, I understand your position, I get where you're coming from. Feels perhaps a little more empathetic, like suggesting you understand their motivation or reasoning, not just the logic of their statement.
Yes, exactly. Get where you're coming from implies understanding the origin or basis of their opinion. That's an interesting perspective, but I think is also very effective. It frames the other person's view as a perspective, which is neutral and non-confrontational.
Okay.
It acknowledges their viewpoint's existence and even calls it interesting before presenting yours as a different alternative perspective. It's less about one being right or wrong and more about different ways of seeing things.
And I respect your opinion, but I have a different view is the most explicit about the politeness, isn't it? It directly states respect for the person's right to their view before stating your own. It sets a clear boundary. I value you and your right to think, even if my thought is different.
This set of phrases shows that the source emphasizes validating the person or their right to a view, even while disagreeing with the substance of the view itself. It's quite sophisticated, socially.
Let's apply this to the source's example. Someone says, I think social media is bad for society. A blunt, I disagree, could really shut down the conversation.
Yeah, it could feel quite aggressive. The source offers alternatives using these softening techniques. First, I see your point, but I think social media has some benefits too, like keeping people connected.
Okay, breaking that down, acknowledgement, I see your point, plus the but signal, plus the differing view, I think social media has some benefits too, plus a specific example supporting the differing view, like keeping people connected. Just like with giving opinions, the source shows that a polite disagreement isn't just contradicting, it's offering your own viewpoint and backing it up, even briefly.
Yes, you're not just negating their point, you're introducing a counterpoint with its own justification. The second example from the source is, that's an interesting perspective, but I actually think it depends on how people use it.
This one is nuanced. It uses the perspective acknowledgement and introduces a conditional disagreement. Depends on how people use it. It shifts the focus from whether social media is inherently good or bad to the application of social media.
Right.
And the word actually adds a subtle emphasis that this is genuinely your alternative viewpoint.
It's a more sophisticated form of disagreement that adds complexity rather than just stating the opposite. It suggests that the truth might lie in the details or the context rather than a simple binary. Very useful skill.
These examples are so useful because they show the structure. Acknowledge, signal, disagreement, but let's state your position, add support or nuance. Let's generate more hypotheticals using these structures. Imagine someone says, homework is a waste of time. Kids learn everything in school.
Okay, a common debate. Using, I get what you're saying, but I feel differently. I get what you're saying, and I understand the concern about kids' time, but I feel differently. I think homework in moderation can help reinforce concepts and build discipline outside the classroom. Acknowledgement plus phrase plus differing view plus specific reasons. Reinforce concepts, build discipline.
Or using, that's an interesting perspective, but I think that's an interesting perspective, but I think the type of homework matters. Busy work might be a waste, but assignments that encourage critical thinking or creativity are valuable. Acknowledgement of perspective, plus phrase, plus nuanced differing view type matters, plus elaboration.
Good one. Imagine the topic is online shopping versus physical stores. Someone says, online shopping is better because you can find anything you want.
You could use, I see your point, bud, and great.
Yeah.
I see your point. The variety online is incredible. But I think physical stores offer better experience because you can see and feel the product immediately. And, there's a social aspect to browsing sometimes. Acknowledgement of their point, plus phrase, plus differing view, better experience, plus multiple reasons details.
Or using, I respect your opinion, but I have a different view. I respect your opinion, but I have a different view. I'm actually quite concerned about the environmental impact of all the packaging and individual deliveries with online shopping compared to, say, one truck delivering to a store. Direct respect, plus phrase, plus differing view, environmental concern, plus specific reason.
Right.
These examples, following the source's patterns, allow you to disagree respectfully while still clearly stating your own well-supported position.
It really highlights that polite disagreement is a skill built on showing you've listened, using softening language, and then contributing your own side of the argument with some substance. And predictably, the source recommends practicing these phrases through repetition until they feel natural.
Yes, the theme of active practice is consistent throughout the source, which makes sense. Finally, the source moves beyond just clarity and politeness to something that adds a bit of flavor to conversation. Engagement.
This is where the source talks about adding personality. The idea is that native speakers don't just state their opinion, they add personality to it. This shifts from pure function to style.
It breaks this down into a couple of ways. First, using expressions to introduce your thoughts naturally. The phrases listed here are, honestly, I think. To be fair, I'd say. And if you ask me.
Honestly, I think often signals sincerity, or perhaps you're about to express an opinion that might be a bit sensitive, maybe unpopular, or just something you feel strongly about and want to emphasize the truthfulness of your feeling.
Yes, it adds a layer of earnestness, if you ask me, is a very common, slightly informal way to explicitly tag something as your personal opinion, almost like you're saying, if you want my 2 cents.
Yeah, like that.
It frames your opinion as a response to a hypothetical question, which can make it feel less like you're just pushing your view out there.
And to be fair, I'd say, the source lists it here. This phrase is frequently used when you're presenting a balanced perspective, right? Perhaps acknowledging a valid point on the opposing side before stating your own main point, or when you're trying to be objective about something. The source doesn't detail this specific use case, but including it in the adding personality section implies it's a way to add a measured, thoughtful tone.
It adds a sense of fairness or objectivity to your statement, even if it's still an opinion. Like, to be fair, it rained on our picnic, but we still had fun playing cards indoors. You acknowledge the negative, to be fair, before the positive opinion.
Got it. The second way the source suggests adding engagement is by adding a little emotion or humor. Examples here are fantastic. First, I'd say pineapple on pizza is a crime, but that's just me.
This is a classic example of using hyperbole, extreme exaggeration for effect. Calling pineapple on pizza a crime is clearly not meant literally, and it's funny because it's such an over-the-top reaction to a common, lighthearted debate.
Definitely memorable.
And the tag, but that's just me, is crucial. It softens the hyperbole, makes it clear it's a personal, a perhaps slightly irrational, strong feeling, and adds self-deprecating humor. It makes the speaker sound relatable and not overly serious.
That example is so effective because it taps into a real, albeit minor, cultural divide and uses playful exaggeration. The second example from the source is, honestly, I'd rather wake up at 5 a.m. than sit in traffic for 2 hours.
This one combines the honestly intro phrase with a relatable and slightly dramatic comparison. It taps into a common shared negative experience, bad traffic, and uses it to emphasize a strong personal preference, waking up early. It's engaging because it evokes a feeling listeners can relate to and presents the opinion in a vivid way.
So the source is suggesting that making your opinions engaging involves using these conversational intro phrases and employing techniques like hyperbole, relatable comparisons, or expressing strong, perhaps slightly quirky personal feelings in a lighthearted way. It's about making your opinion sound like it comes from a real person, not a textbook.
Exactly. Let's try generating some more examples combining these engagement techniques.
Sure.
Using honestly, I think, with a personal, maybe slightly unexpected opinion. Honestly, I think the best way to solve creative block is just to take a nap. It uses honestly to lend conviction to a simple, relatable solution.
I like that one.
Sure.
How about to be fair, I'd say, with a balanced viewpoint. To be fair, I'd say that reality TV isn't entirely worthless. Sometimes it sparks interesting conversations about human behavior, even if it's mostly junk.
Yeah.
Used, to be fair, to acknowledge the counter-argument, mostly junk, while still finding a small positive. Sparks interesting conversations.
Nice balance. And for the hyperbole humor angle, inspired by the pineapple pizza example, instead of just, I hate doing laundry, you could say something like, I'd rather wrestle a bear than fold laundry, but
Yeah.
someone's got to wear clean socks, right?
Okay.
Extreme exaggeration for humor, followed by a relatable, slightly resigned tag.
Huh. Or using a comparison for emotional impact, like the traffic example. Honestly, trying to assemble IKEA furniture feels like solving a complex puzzle with half the pieces missing. Combines honestly with a relatable, slightly exasperated comparison. These kinds of examples, based on the source's suggestions, add character and make your speech more vivid.
And the source's final advice for engagement is, you guessed it, practice through repetition. Making these phrases and techniques feel natural in your own voice requires conscious effort and frequent use.
So we've broken down the source's core lessons: giving opinions with structure and reason, agreeing with elaboration or personal connection, disagreeing politely using softening techniques, and adding engagement with conversational phrases and personality. The source then wraps up by reinforcing these points with a recap.
Yes, it provides a concise summary of the key phrases, which is a good learning strategy for retention. But then, and this is a key part of the source's method, it immediately presents a challenge task.
This is where the source moves from instruction to application. Step 1 of the challenge is, have a conversation where you express your opinion about a movie, a book, or any topic you care about. This is direct instruction to use the language in a real context, very practical.
Step 2 ups the ante. Use at least one phrase to agree or disagree. Try to make your response more engaging and natural. It specifically tells the learner to apply the new techniques using the alternative phrases and aiming for the engagement we just discussed. It pushes them out of their basic habits.
And step 3 is perhaps the most powerful part of the source's pedagogical approach. Reflect on your conversation. Ask yourself, did I sound confident? Which phrase worked best for me? What can I improve next time? This metacognitive step encourages self-assessment.
Exactly.
It's not just about using the phrases, but evaluating how you use them and their impact, guiding your future practice.
This reflection piece is often missing in language learning materials, but the source makes it central. It acknowledges that learning is an iterative process of trying, observing, and adjusting.
Yeah.
Really valuable.
The source also includes a call for interaction, asking questions like, what phrase did you use today? Did it help make the conversation easier? What's the hardest part of expressing opinions in English for you? This indicates the source might be part of a community or platform where learners can share their experiences, which adds a social layer to the learning.
Yeah, that community aspect can be really motivating. Finally, the source gives a brief glimpse of what's next, mentioning that the topic for the following day is storytelling. This shows that expressing opinions is seen as one piece of a larger puzzle in conversational fluency, integrated into a structured program that builds skills over time.
Wow. So stepping back and looking at the whole day7.pdf source we've just analyzed, it offers a clear step-by-step approach to upgrading your conversational English beyond the basics. It doesn't just list phrases. It provides a framework for building more confident opinions. Phrase plus reason detail. More engaging agreements. Phrase plus elaboration bank, and more polite disagreements, acknowledgement plus phrase, plus your point nuance plus support. And it explicitly encourages adding personality.
For you, the listener, diving into this source with us today provides a direct look at one potential roadmap for improving these skills. Understanding the purpose behind these alternative phrases, politeness, clarity, engagement, naturalness as presented by the source, gives you a focused target for your practice. It moves beyond simple memorization to understanding function and strategy.
And reflecting on the source's method itself, its structure, its examples, its emphasis on practice and self-reflection, it seems like a really well-thought-out approach to skill acquisition in language learning. Very solid.
It certainly does. And the source's significant focus on using specific softening phrases for disagreement, starting with acknowledging the other person's view. It raises an interesting question for you to consider based only on the material we've covered from this source. The sheer number and consistency of these polite disagreement strategies. What does that tell us about the social expectations around expressing differing views, perhaps within English-speaking contexts? Or maybe about the particular challenges learners face in navigating being direct versus being perceived as impolite?
Interesting angle.
Think about how deliberately practicing these specific politeness techniques, as recommended by the source, might not just change how you phrase your disagreements, but perhaps change how comfortable or confident you feel, even initiating a conversation where opinions might not align. Does mastering the how make you more willing to engage with the what?
A lot to think about, pulled straight from just this one source.
Something to ponder as you put these phrases into practice.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.